Have you ever been watching something or listening to something that just really impacted you? The point is that we all have moments that shake us up and make us see things differently in this world. Often these moments stick with us long after they're over. Sometimes the message that sticks with us the most come from much closer to home, and unfortunately, not all of them are positive. We also have moments that leave a different kind of mark, moments that plant seeds of doubt, shame, and regret. These things create messages about who we are, our worth, and our place in the world. When we haven't forgiven ourselves for these things, these messages can become a constant crushing weight. We've talked about how we can build up a barrier of bitterness towards other people, but sometimes we struggle with bitterness towards ourselves. Now, we carry this bitterness towards ourselves and we think we deserve to carry it. When it comes to the idea of give and take, how can we give forgiveness when we haven't received it for ourselves? To answer that, I want to look at an early Christian leader, Paul, who taught that forgiveness should be a defining characteristic of following Jesus. In an ancient letter that he wrote to a church in a city, Paul gave some practical advice on how to live as a follower of Jesus. He says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Paul says that God forgave us all. That includes you with all your mistakes, all your regrets, all the weight of bitterness that you're carrying. You have been forgiven. But why would God forgive us? Well, Paul answered that question in another letter he wrote. This time it was to the Romans. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. That's what he wrote to the Romans. And I love that because there's something that verse taught me and that I say to students all the time. Christ died 2,000 years ago for mistakes that you're going to make tomorrow. See, God didn't wait for us to get our act together in order to earn our forgiveness. Here's where it gets challenging. If God can forgive us for all of that, who are we to withhold forgiveness from ourselves? Sometimes we carry around guilt like it's a debt that we owe. We keep punishing ourselves, never feeling like we've paid enough to make up for that mistake. While we're busy tallying up our debts, God has already taken care of it. Through Jesus, God has already forgiven our debt. God's forgiveness is so powerful that it frees us from the weight of guilt and shame. It doesn't mean that we don't take responsibility for the things that we've done or try to make an amends for people that we've hurt. It does mean that we can stop defining ourselves by the mistakes that we've made and instead see ourselves as God sees us, forgiven and redeemed. The question is, will we live like we're forgiven? Whether you need to forgive someone else or forgive yourself, Paul was really clear about what Jesus followers are invited to do. Forgive like you have been forgiven. When it comes to giving and taking, you can't give what you haven't received. Embracing God's forgiveness and grace towards you is the starting point for forgiving others. So, how do we embrace God's forgiveness and let go of those negative messages that we've been carrying around with us? I think it helps if we acknowledge that we're hurting. And we can be honest with God about that. He is a God who suffers with us. I think that we can try to learn to accept God's forgiveness, and that's a daily practice. I also think that we can rewrite that message. Forgive as you have been forgiven is a big step. Applying these things into our thought process of how we can forgive ourselves isn't easy. And often, more times than not, it's not a one-time event. We have to do it over and over and over again. It's a process that requires patience and persistence. But as you constantly practice acknowledging your mistakes, accepting God's forgiveness, and rewriting the negative messages that you tell yourself, you will notice a change. As you learn to extend grace to yourself, you'll likely find it easier to extend it to others. Forgiveness doesn't just free you, it has the power to transform all of your relationships. So as we wrap this up, I want you to imagine what your life would look like if you weren't carrying around all that guilt and shame and you started to embrace God's love and forgiveness and grace for you. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.